All right, so get this. We're doing a deep dive today on something that, on the surface, seems pretty straightforward. But when you really look at it, it's actually kind of head-scratching.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like sometimes in the NFL, you get these games where the score doesn't really tell the whole story.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're talking about today. We're going to be looking at that Week 18 game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Denver Broncos. And
Oh yeah, that one was wild. The Broncos just demolished the Chiefs.
31-0, a total blowout. But that's just it. The score makes it seem like a huge upset. But we're going deeper than that. We're looking at fan reactions from Reddit game thread. And also, there's this really interesting article about the Chiefs' decision to rest their starters for this game.
I think that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. You've got this game with a really lopsided score, but when you look at the context and you see how the fans were reacting, it really opens up a whole new perspective.
Okay, so before we jump into all of that, let's just quickly set the scene for anyone who maybe didn't see this game. So Broncos beat the Chiefs 31-0. Huge upset, right?
On the surface, absolutely. But like you said, there's more to it. The Chiefs had already clinched that #1 seed in the AFC, which means they get a bye week in the playoffs and home field advantage throughout. So they made the decision to rest some of their key players, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, you know, the big guns.
The calculated risk, for sure.
Definitely. And I think that's a big part of why the fan reactions were so interesting. Let's start with the Broncos fans. Early on in that Reddit thread, you can see this kind of like cautious optimism, almost like they couldn't believe what was happening.
Right. Like, is this actually happening? Are we really beating the Chiefs this badly?
Yeah, exactly. And there's this one comment that I think really captures that feeling. Someone wrote, "This is the most any team has scored against KC all season, and there's a whole quarter left. Broncos might be the best of the AFC, and maybe Bo Nix MVP should be talked about more."
I love that. They're winning big against the Chiefs, but they're still like, wait a minute, is this real? Are we actually good?
Well, think about it. They're so used to seeing the Chiefs dominate. So even with the backups in, there's still that little bit of doubt. But as the game went on, that caution turned into pure joy. You start seeing comments like, "I am so happy," with the crying emoji, and "believers are eating good." It's like they're finally allowing themselves to believe in this team.
Okay, so the Broncos fans are understandably over the moon. But what about the Chiefs fans? Were they freaking out about this blowout loss?
Not really. Actually, a lot of the comments I saw from Chiefs fans showed that they understood the logic behind resting the starters. They were pointing to Andy Reid's track record. His teams historically do really well after a bye week.
Which makes sense. 2 weeks to game plan, rest up, make adjustments.
Exactly. And the article we have really supports this. It talks about how Mahomes was actually recovering from an ankle sprain he suffered a few weeks back, and how the Chiefs' priority is making a deep playoff run, not winning a meaningless Week 18 game.
So the Chiefs fans were really looking at the bigger picture. But let's talk about the Bengals fans for a second. Because their playoff hopes were completely dependent on a Chiefs victory. Can you imagine the stress?
Oh, man. Yeah. Their comments throughout the game thread are like a total emotional roller coaster. Early on, you see comments like, "Chiefs are about to make the biggest comeback and save the Bengals season." They were clinging to that hope.
But as the Broncos started to pull away, that hope kind of turned into, well, let's just say the Bengals fans weren't too thrilled.
There was one comment that just said, "Bengals fans in shambles aren't." I mean, you can just feel the disappointment through the screen.
It's brutal.
It-
But even in their despair, they managed to find some humor.
Mm.
One fan wrote, "I'm chilling just watching my team get shit on while all the shit talkers are long gone. I guess I'm just a masochist. Gotta admire the dedication to stick it out till the end, right?"
It really shows you how emotionally invested fans are in their teams. Every game matters, even if logically this one didn't have a huge impact on the Chiefs' season.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about the playoff implications, the emotional roller coaster for the fans. But this game also sparked a lot of debate about one player in particular, Bo Nix.
Oh, yeah. Nix had an incredible game. I mean, he threw for 304 yards and 4 touchdowns, completed 25 of his 28 passes. And some people were even arguing that this performance should put him in the Rookie of the Year conversation.
Which is interesting because before this game, he wasn't really considered a front runner for that award at all.
Right. But this game raised the question, should a single performance, even one as impressive as this, change how we evaluate a player's entire season? Especially when you consider that the Chiefs were resting their starters. It's a really complex issue with no easy answers.
And it wasn't just the Rookie of the Year race that this game brought up. There were also some pretty heated discussions about the performance of the Chiefs' backups.
Yeah, some fans were questioning their effort. Seeing that blowout as a potential sign of weakness, like if the backups can't even keep it close, what does that say about the depth of this team?
But then others were arguing that it's not fair to judge the backups based on a game where the whole team's strategy was totally different. Like they were saying, with an entire second-string unit playing, it's a completely different dynamic. It's not like plugging in one or two backups into a starting lineup.
And that's where it gets really interesting. It forces us to think critically about how we evaluate performance, especially in unusual circumstances like this. What are the limitations of judging backups? How much weight should we really give to a game where the stakes are so different for both teams?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's almost like this one game, a game that a lot of people might have just dismissed as meaningless, actually raises a whole bunch of really intriguing questions about how we understand the NFL. It's not just about who wins and loses, but about the context, the strategy, even the psychology of the fans.
Absolutely. It's like this game became a case study in all the different layers of the NFL, and that's what makes this deep dive so compelling. It's a reminder that sometimes the most interesting stories in sports are the ones that lie beneath the surface.
I totally agree, and that's what we're going to keep digging into. So let's take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll dive even deeper into the implications of this game and what it might mean for the future of both of these teams.
You know, it's funny, as we're looking at all these fan reactions, one thing that really jumps out at me is this contrast between, like, short-term results versus long-term strategy.
Yeah, it's like that old saying, you can't win them all. But in the NFL, especially when you're talking about playoff implications, that can be a tough pill to swallow.
Right. But look at the Chiefs. Their decision to rest their starters in Week 18, on paper, it's a loss. But they're playing the long game here.
Yeah.
They've got their eyes on the Super Bowl, not a Week 18 win that ultimately doesn't change their playoff seeding.
Yeah, it's that whole idea of process over outcome. They're trusting their process, knowing that a single loss in the grand scheme of things doesn't derail their larger goals.
Exactly. And I think there's a lesson there that we can all apply to our own lives. You know, sometimes you got to take a step back and accept a minor setback if it means getting closer to your ultimate objective.
I like that. So we've talked about the Chiefs embracing this long-term strategy. But what about the Broncos? Their win might have come against backups, but it still earned them a playoff spot. How do we interpret that within this framework of process versus outcome?
That's where things get really interesting. Because for the Broncos, this win wasn't just about securing a playoff berth. It was about seizing an opportunity. Their backup players got to step up, gain valuable experience, and taste victory. That kind of momentum can be a powerful thing, even heading into a tough playoff matchup.
You mentioned momentum. Now, some people might argue that momentum is a myth. But I'm curious from your perspective, how much weight do you give to that psychological boost?
It's tricky. On one hand, you can't discount the power of confidence and belief. When a team is rolling, they start to feel invincible, and that can translate into on-field performance.
So for the Broncos, even though they're facing a really tough opponent in the Bills, there's a chance that momentum from their Week 18 win could actually give them an edge.
It's certainly possible. I mean, look, the Bills are the favorites, no doubt. But we've seen crazier things happen in the playoffs.
That's the beauty of the NFL.
Right.
Any given Sunday.
Exactly. And let's not forget, for several Broncos players, they were close to hitting performance bonuses tied to playing time or stats. So this win likely pushed them over the edge, which is another layer to consider.
It's a good reminder that even in a game that from the outside might have seemed inconsequential, there are real tangible rewards on the line for these players.
Yeah, it speaks to the complexity of professional sports. There's always more to the story than meets the eye.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about those playoff implications a bit more. The Bengals, unfortunately, are out of the picture after that Chiefs loss. It's going to be the Broncos taking on the Buffalo Bills in the wildcard round.
And most analysts are predicting a Bills victory. They've got a more experienced quarterback, a more talented roster overall.
But the Broncos are playing with house money now. They weren't even expected to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
And now they have a chance to pull off a major upset. One Broncos fan in the Reddit thread even said, "We beat them in Buffalo last year. We can do it again. Defense can hold Allen in check. They're not backing down."
I love that confidence. It adds a whole other layer of intrigue to this matchup.
Yeah.
And for the Chiefs, who are waiting in the wings with their rested starters, it adds another wrinkle to their potential playoff path.
Right. So if the Broncos manage to upset the Bills, the Chiefs could be facing a much tougher opponent than they initially anticipated.
Precisely. And that circles back to that whole idea of short-term sacrifice for potential long-term gain. The Chiefs took a calculated risk in resting their starters. And now they have to deal with the consequences, whatever those may be.
It's like a chess match, isn't it? Every move has ripple effects.
Absolutely. And speaking of ripple effects, this Week 18 game also offered a little glimpse into the future of the AFC West.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, Bo Nix's performance, aside from sparking that whole Rookie of the Year debate, it also signaled his potential as a future star in this division.
So we could be looking at a future where the Broncos, with Nick leading the way, are serious contenders for the AFC West crown.
It's definitely within the realm of possibility. If he continues to develop at this rate, he could be a major problem for the Chiefs and the rest of the AFC West for years to come.
Which makes you wonder, did the Chiefs inadvertently create a monster by giving Nix this opportunity to shine on a national stage? It's like a butterfly effect situation.
It's fascinating, right? You have this one seemingly insignificant game, and it could end up having major implications for the balance of power in the entire division for years to come.
It's a good reminder that in the NFL, things are always in flux. Dynasties rise and fall. New challengers emerge. And sometimes those shifts happen in the most unexpected ways.
Exactly. And while we're talking about unexpected outcomes, I think it's important to address one potential downside to the Chiefs' decision to rest their starters.
Okay, I'm listening.
Well, we talked about the benefits of rest and preparation, but some fans, even Chiefs fans, expressed concern about the potential for rust.
Right. It's like that old adage, if you don't use it, you lose it.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a risk that the Chiefs could come out flat in their first playoff game after 2 weeks of not playing?
It's a legitimate concern. One commenter in the Reddit thread put it this way: is resting their starters the best idea for the Chiefs? Between their Christmas game to divisional round, they would have gone almost a month without game speed football. Won't they risk being insanely rusty?
It's a valid point. You can practice all you want, but there's no substitute for the speed and intensity of a real game.
Right. And it's a delicate balance that coaches have to strike. Do you prioritize rest and injury prevention, or do you risk some rust in order to maintain momentum?
The Chiefs are betting on the former. And they do have a history of success with this approach, so there's reason to trust their judgment.
But it'll be interesting to see how they come out in that first playoff game. Will they be refreshed and ready to dominate? Or will there be a period of adjustment as they get back up to game speed?
I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But, this whole conversation about rust and momentum brings up another interesting question. What is momentum exactly? Is it a real thing? Or is it just a narrative we create to explain what we see in sports?
It's a question that's been debated for as long as sports have existed, and honestly, I don't think there's a definitive answer.
I mean, we could point to examples of teams that seem to be on a roll, riding a wave of momentum, but is that just a coincidence? Is it a product of talent and skill? Or is there something more to it?
And this game, with the Broncos' improbable win and the Chiefs' calculated decision to rest their starters, it throws all those assumptions about momentum into question.
It's like this game has become a case study in the unpredictable nature of sports.
Exactly. And that unpredictability, that element of the unknown, that's what keeps us coming back for more.
It's funny. We spent all this time, talking about this game, the fan reactions, the decisions that were made, and we haven't even really touched on the final score.
Yeah, and I think that actually says a lot about what we've discovered here. This wasn't just about a game. It was about so much more.
Right? It was about the context.
Yeah.
It was about the narratives that emerged. It's like this one game became a window into all these different layers of the NFL. The strategy, the psychology, the emotions. It's almost like a microcosm of the entire league.
I like that, a microcosm. And within that microcosm, we saw how a single game, even one that a lot of people might have dismissed as meaningless, could generate such a wide range of interpretations and narratives.
Yeah, we had the narrative of the underdog Broncos seizing their moment, the narrative of the Chiefs trusting their process and looking ahead to the bigger picture, the narrative of Bo Nix announcing himself as a potential future star. It's fascinating how these narratives shape our understanding of the game.
Absolutely. They create these storylines that we latch onto. They give us a framework for interpreting what we see on the field.
And those narratives, whether we realize it or not, influence how we predict what's going to happen next. Take the Broncos, for example. They're heading into the playoffs as heavy underdogs against the Bills. But after that Week 18 performance, there's this sense of belief, this feeling that maybe they can pull off another upset.
It's the classic underdog story. And as humans, we're drawn to those stories. We want to see the unexpected happen. We root for the team that defies the odds.
And that's what makes sports so compelling. It's not always about who has the most talent or the best record. It's about the human element, the emotions, the narratives, the moments that transcend the stats and the analysis.
I think that's a great takeaway from this deep dive. We can talk all day about X's and O's, but at the end of the day, sports are about stories. They're about the human drama that plays out on the field, on the court, on the ice. And those stories are what connect us to the games we love.
Absolutely. And that's what we've tried to do here today. Uncover those stories, explore the narratives, delve into the deeper meaning behind a game that on the surface might not have seemed all that significant.
It's a reminder that sometimes the most interesting discoveries come when we look beyond the obvious and ask ourselves, what else is going on here?
So to wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder. As you watch these playoffs unfold, pay attention to the narratives that emerge, the stories that are being told, the undercurrents of belief and doubt. Because those narratives are often just as compelling as the games themselves.
They offer insights into the human drama that plays out on the field, the motivations, the aspirations, the triumphs, the heartbreaks. And in the end, it's those human stories that make sports so much more than just games.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep